What Really Happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Thursday, July 14th, 2016. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. We have got a lot of stuff to talk about today. Mike is in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble. The phone lines are open. 800-313-9443. 800-313-9443. And happy Bastille Day. Today's the anniversary of when the French finally had enough with their autocratic, tyrannical regime and stormed the Bastille. And there weren't even all that many prisoners being held in there, but it represented a symbol and basically marked the end of the era where Louis XVI was controlling the political discourse within all of France, and it was beginning of the actual French Revolution. So something to keep in mind here during these dark times here in the United States of America. All righty, now then. The U.S., talking about tomorrow, the Day of Rage, this thing stinks to high heaven. And now we are seeing this story that came out on thomasdishaw.com. U.S. military told to avoid the 37 American cities where Black Lives Matter are holding their Day of Rage protests/riots. Out of concern, they may turn violent. Well, given the high probability that that's exactly what's going to happen, you would think you would have the military, the National Guard, or the police close at hand. And the instant I read this story, the very first thing I thought of was all the way back in the Baltimore riots, where the mayor of Baltimore ordered the police to stand down when the riots began. And we have a video, we posted it to WhatReallyHappened.com, of the mayor trying to explain the decision, and she actually said, we gave them space to destroy. So is that the plan for tomorrow? They're just going to back up, let everybody have a real ruckus, and then say, oh my goodness, look at all those, the horrible destruction. We have to do something. There's got to be a national emergency and martial law and blah, 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 blah. So a lot of people are beginning to look at this leader of Black Lives Matter, DeRay McKesson. He lives in a home, very expensive home, owned by one of George Soros' associates, board member in one of his foundations. And it's just getting a little weird because this same guy had a 4-hour meeting with Obama at the White House. Or at least he had a meeting with somebody at the White House just yesterday. George Soros is already out there tweeting. There's going to be riots. There'll be a police state. It's going to be a civil war. They're pushing this thing as hard as they can. And one more time to everybody out there, you may think you're protesting and demonstrating against the U.S. government, but you are doing exactly what the U.S. government wants you to do to bring about political change. This is a replay of the 1960s COINTELPRO, where the FBI's undercover informants deliberately fanned up racial tension to keep Americans turned against each other so they could not unite in opposition against government policies, which included the war in Vietnam. The government loves to play dirty. They don't feel constrained by the rules. Look at Hillary Clinton and James Comey and Loretta Lynch, if you don't think that's a reality. And Black Lives Matter, it doesn't matter how much the media pushes them. Their actions are really turning people off. They're being seen more and more as the bad guys here. And apparently they had a nasty incident where they blocked off a bridge, Black Lives Matter, and they blocked this ambulance that was trying to get to the hospital with this very ill child who almost died. Don't children's lives matter? Now we've got some of the Black Lives Matter spokes drones out there demanding all police departments be closed nationwide and basically no limits on criminal behavior because of slavery. Well, none of those Black Lives Matter people were ever slaves. Nobody alive today was ever a slave owner. And Black Lives Matter said, well, you're all descended from slave owners. No, actually, the vast majority of us are not. And in my case, I'm descended from people who ran a station on that Underground Railroad. Now, according to Breitbart, Black Lives Matter is demanding the dismantling of the police departments, disarming, defunding, demilitarizing, and disbanding all police. And they actually go on to say that if the police stop abusing the American people, violent criminals will stop committing crimes if we're just nice to them. Now, I'll be the first to agree. The police have gotten completely out of control in this country. But we do need a police force to deal with the real criminals. We just need to make sure that the police force constrains itself to operating within the law, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights. That's it. Now, over at Fresno B, the police have released a video showing the shooting of an unarmed white man who was apparently shot because of a language barrier, where somebody had called in saying they saw a man with a rifle moving around a gas station. The police showed up. They saw this guy, kept telling him to stop and show his hands. And apparently he didn't understand them. And so they shot and killed him. And they've released the video. So what are we going to see? All the white people in America are going to start throwing things through store windows and looting and pillaging? I don't think so. It doesn't work that way. All right, let's grab ourselves a quick phone call. Ed, Michigan, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, sir. I totally have to hand it to you about your show on Liberty yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
And I brought the subject up to an old-time Air Force pilot. He's in his 80s, and he didn't know the first thing about it. And it just totally blew him away when I told him about the Liberty.
Yeah, a lot of military people don't, unless they were actually close to the investigation, they don't know. If you really think about it, those military bases and communities are kind of closed little enclaves where they associate with themselves. The contact with the outside world is very limited, and there's a great deal of censorship on the Internet in those military bases. If you're inside one of these on-base military housing areas, you can't reach WhatReallyHappened.com. They don't want the military to know what's been going on. They certainly don't want the military to know how poorly the government is treating those wounded veterans. And so it's rather ironic that a disproportionate amount of the U.S. government's propaganda effort is directed at those people in uniform who have sworn an oath to support that government.
Mike, I have a little bit of more information about the bailiffs that were shot in Berrien County.
Yes.
And the guy that did the shooting was holding a 17-year-old girl hostage for up to 2 weeks and raping her. This is in the paper.
Could you send me that?
Quite a bit of time.
Yeah, I could understand that. So this was, that's funny. The corporate media is making it look like it's another case of somebody just walking in and shooting those brave serving law officers. But that changes the whole complexion of the attitude there. I'm trying to figure out, how did he get in there with a gun in the first place? Because
the second floor of the courthouse is the felony court, and as soon as you get up on the second floor, if you're an inmate, they take your handcuffs off up there.
No,
then the deputies walk through there with their guns.
So did he grab somebody else's gun?
Yeah, he grabbed the deputy Atterbury's gun.
Okay, well, that's a very, very different take on the story then. And thank you for that update. That's important information there. You know, because it struck me as weird that this guy would have gotten in there with a gun. Because the last time I had to go to court, I was a witness in something involving a neighbor, and I don't need to go into it. But Claire and I were called as witnesses on a couple of occasions. And, man, metal detectors, body pat down, everything. There was no way you could get a gun into that courthouse. So it makes sense that, like that guy who tried to shoot Donald Trump, to grab one of the guns held by the officers, which shows a certain laxness on the part of those officers as well. Anyway, Ed, thank you very much for the information. We're going to let you go here. Thank you for the phone call. And I'm going to switch over to Jim in Chicago. Aloha, Jim. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. That term, Day of Rage, reminds me of what the weathermen did in 1969 in Chicago. I was 21 at the time, and I recall what they did. They decided to go downtown to the main areas and start tearing up shops, fighting policemen, and doing a lot of chaos in the city of Chicago. And that was 1969 with the Weathermen.
Well, that was all part of that FBI COINTELPRO situation.
There you go. In fact, I went to their convention, the SDS, back in October of 1968, and that's when the Weathermen really got their entrance on the scene.
Yeah, it was all stage managed. It's come out that, you remember the Symbionese Liberation Army and their leader, right, Sin-Q, and they kidnapped Patty Hearst? That was all being stage managed, and they specifically kidnapped Patty Hearst to guarantee the news coverage of the Hearst newspapers as to what was going on. Then when they had that final shootout in Los Angeles and they burned up the house, when they finally sorted through all the ashes, the leaders of the Symbionese Liberation Army, Sin-Q and his senior leaders, they were not there. They were gone, and they were never found after that. And something you need to know about all these little groups that are out there, militias and so forth and so on, they're being set up by undercover FBI informants who are there to trick you into doing something the media can use to demonize a segment of society or just build up that general level of constant fear. And when there's a spectacular demise to the group, those top leaders are never caught. They just vanish into the woodwork, and that will be that.
And the final thing, everyone should go back and listen to the song called Ohio by Crosby, Stills and Nash, which came out in 1970, right after Kent State. And that's kind of ironic that, all this stuff is going to be going on in Ohio.
Yes. And that's an important reference to make, Kent State, because, as you know, there was a peaceful protest against the war, and then all of a sudden the National Guard fired into the students. It was a huge PR disaster. It later came out that an undercover FBI informant had fired a starter pistol to one side of the protesters, and that's what got the National Guard shooting. I mean, this is how they play these games.
Right. And again, history is going to repeat itself.
Well, that's what's wrong with history.
Right. All right, Mike, you take care.
All right, thanks an awful lot for the phone call. And getting on back to the news, now, at this point, we're starting to hear more and more leaks and so forth that Donald Trump is going to pick Mike Pence as his running mate, which is probably going to lock in a huge chunk of the evangelical vote. So it's actually a very smart move for him to make. And they're leaking it out all over the place to the New York Times, but they'll make the official announcement tomorrow. But by then, everybody will already know what's going on there. Now, interesting story out of ABC, warning of a GOP convention floor fight. Now, what's going on, the Dump Trump movement, which we know is being primarily funded and motivated by Mitt Romney, who could not possibly wind up the nominee because he didn't run in any of the primaries. They have failed to get enough people on the Rules Committee to push through this vote your conscience rule change, which would allow the delegates to be unbound on that first vote, and which would, of course, immediately send a message from the GOP leadership to the GOP voters: we don't care what you want. You're not allowed to pick your own candidates anymore, which could be the end of the GOP, could be the beginning of more rioting and yet another civil war. So a lot of people are cool on that idea. What we're hearing now is that a lot of the bound delegates are being approached directly and being arm-twisted and browbeaten and possibly threatened, even bribed, to not vote for Donald Trump on that first ballot, even though they are pledged to him, committed to him. They're going to go rogue. And if Trump does not win on that first ballot, then all bets are off, and they can basically have a floor fight to kick Donald Trump out. And at that point, Hillary as president is a foregone conclusion. The Republicans don't have anybody else there who could possibly defeat her in November. And it underscores the fact the GOP leadership is either so afraid of Donald Trump or so bought by Hillary Clinton, they're going to hand her the White House. And that alone is probably going to destroy the GOP, and we're going to wind up a one political party nation like the former Soviet Union. So this is all bad stuff. Let's go back to the phones. Francis in North Carolina. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. Hello.
Hello.
Hey. A couple of quick sentiments for you. One, the fact that you have to go through an underground internet connection or whatever to access this site or whatever regarding Black Lives Matters or whatever you want to call it, smacks of some alphabet soup agency setting this thing up to create a fiasco, as far as that part goes. The other thought is this. I know Durham is not too far from us here centrally in Raleigh, Cary, Chapel Hill and Durham and all that stuff. If people want to have something to do for that day, tomorrow, I can think of one thing they can do that would be more advantageous. You know what that is?
Nope.
Well, if they think that just Black Lives Matter, it should be every ethnic background life matters. Go and visit someone as elderly in your family and spend time with them and contemplate the wisdom that they have to share with you for a change.
That's a very, very good idea. The problem is anytime anybody comes on out and says all lives matter, they're denounced as racists. And we have had people who've gotten up and made... you're racist for saying all lives matter. Well,
guess what? We're all human beings to a certain extent, regardless of what your ethnic background is.
Well, you're absolutely
right. People need to grow up.
Well, yeah, but this has nothing to do with growing up or anything. This is a political agenda at work. They're trying to push reverse racism and this idea that black lives are important but nobody else is. And we've had people who've made that statement who've been forced to publicly apologize for being racist by saying all lives matter. And I'm waiting for somebody who's with the Black Lives Matter group to come on out and just give us a list in public of the lives that don't matter. I'm still waiting for that.
Well, I was going to say, because quite frankly, if people of a black ethnic background, Negro, whatever terminology you want to use, if they actually start to think about how their ethnic background is being allowed to be used, it is absurd. At least in my background, I am very mixed between European, African,
you're absolutely
Asian,
right. You know,
Native American.
And
quite frankly, I look at myself as being a mixed individual, and this whole thing about sectioning one type of ethnic background from another is an ignorant joke.
It is a joke. I mean, in this day and age, we're all from blended heritages, and this idea that there is a black group and a white group, that's a political construct. I mean, there's a lot of people in the middle. You know, they don't know if they're black or white, and it doesn't really matter. And that was actually kind of a big part of that Michael Jackson song that had the first use of morphing, black and white, and the way he went transracial, you know, toward the end of his career and everything. It doesn't really matter. But, you know, fanning up racial tension is a classic tactic for destabilizing a society. And it's been used to tremendous effect, and they're using it again now.
Well, the real bad question is, and it's rather silly in a way, except for people in various sectors of society, is what ethnic background is Joseph and Joseph, otherwise known as Jesus Christ?
Well, probably close to Palestinian. Based on the DNA research.
Yeah, but he was at least human, wasn't he?
Yeah. You know, of course he was human. You know what's really interesting? The classic image of Jesus Christ, that's universal image, is not Jesus Christ. It's a guy named Caesar Borgia. And he was the son of Pope Alexander IV. And Pope Alexander IV was very alarmed that every church had their own depiction of Jesus. And so he said, we need a unified image of the Jesus. And so he hired a bunch of artists to do paintings to be sent out to all the cathedrals and churches. And he said, use my son Caesar as the model. That's where that particular image comes from. That's Caesar Borgia that you see on all those icons and paintings and everything out of
You know what? You just reminded me of an interesting saying from the last number of years or decade or so. The last time we mixed religion with politics, go figure.
Well, anytime you mix religion with politics, you get all kinds of problems. Wars in England, witch hunts, burnings, hangings, Inquisition, torture. That's why the founding fathers...
That's following it up, yeah.
That's why the founding fathers said there will be no official state religion in the United States. Thank you for the phone call. We got to let you go and take a break for commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to take another phone call. Veronica in Iowa. Aloha, Veronica. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I emailed Black Lives Matter this morning, and I told them if they really want to make a difference, that they should pull all their people and send them to Apple's corporate headquarters to protest them creating a device that can shut off our phones, cameras and video capabilities. I realize that's probably not going to make a lot of difference, but you never know.
It's a good suggestion here, and you're absolutely right. All these instances of police brutality are being caught on civilians with their cell phone cameras. Now, Apple is pitching this idea to protect the intellectual property rights at concert venues, which is going to backfire because taking a selfie with your band in the background is part of that concert experience. And if you don't get to do that, a lot of people just aren't going to bother buying those tickets anymore. But what this is really all about is giving the government a kill switch to stop all cameras operating in areas where there's a situation they don't want to have recorded, which is why if you have one of those older pocket cameras that don't connect to the internet, you should have that when you go to these rallies and protests. And it's small enough to keep in your pocket so the cops won't grab it and smash it, which they have a bad habit of doing. But the other issue that I had is, if Black Lives Matter is really concerned over black lives, why aren't they protesting at those Planned Parenthood clinics who are killing more black children in a day than the police do in an entire year?
Absolutely. My daughter teaches at an inner city school near Chicago, and she teaches 7th grade English. And boy, do I hear some pretty heartbreaking stories from her. And she said most of the kids come into her class with maybe a 2nd grade reading level. Now, if you can't read, what can you do?
Not a whole heck of a lot, you know, and I have the same thing about mathematics. If you're not good at math, you can't operate in the modern world. But it's almost like somebody is trying to sell this idea to minorities that having a good education is part of Whitey's world, and you want to reject that. And of course, it's just another way to keep people down, to get them to turn their back on having a higher education. The more you know, the more effective you are in getting through life and getting through the world. And yet, it's almost weird to see this fashion statement of just saying, I don't need to know, I just need to believe. And of course, that's something we saw in the Common Core, where they were de-emphasizing actual analytical thinking skills in favor of just blind faith in authority.
Well, I went to a Ron Paul rally when he was running, and he made a comment that I repeat often. And he said, educate yourselves. Educated people are very difficult to control.
That's absolutely right.
It's pretty obvious why, you know, our black youth, I hate to pick on them alone because there's a lot of problems in our education system as well, but it's obvious they don't want them to be able to educate themselves.
Yes, you're absolutely right. The one thing that's been missing from the school curriculum all the way back to when I was teaching at the high school level is they don't teach kids how to learn. They just give them things to remember, and they walk on out of that school thinking they have an education, and all they have is a head full of memorized facts. They don't know how to find out things for themselves. I'll give you a very obvious example of this being a political agenda. Was this whole human-caused global warming nonsense that was literally bet on the assumption that the ordinary American people didn't know enough science to see the obvious problems. Obviously, they underestimated the science awareness of most people because we called them on that, and justly so. Okay?
Right. I thank you very much, and anxious for the rest of the show. You do a great job.
All right, thank you very much. We're going to let you go, and we've got 2 more callers waiting, but we're coming up on a commercial break, so I'm going to ask you to just be patient, and we will get to you. Now, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg has now backtracked and expressed regret for her remarks criticizing Donald Trump. She was out of line as a justice of the Supreme Court. They're supposed to be nonpartisan. They're not supposed to get into party politics. They're supposed to be above that. All right, we have to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to go back to the phones here. Steve in California. Aloha, Steve. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
You know, Michael, with this Friday's Day of Rage, it might be best to go back to old technology. If they shut down the phones, your cell phones, as far as being able to take video footage and pictures, then, you know, may be best to actually document the event, what's actually going on for evidence with the old technology, because you know media will film it, but then government will censor it, and they'll only show you what they want to show. So maybe good to go back to old technology on this.
Well, that's what I was saying before. If you have one of those old shirt pocket cameras that don't have Wi-Fi or Bluetooth or anything, you can use that. One of the things that is really good to look at is called an iFi card, and it's an SD memory card for digital SLRs that also has a Wi-Fi port. And when you take pictures, it will hunt for an open Wi-Fi port and send your pictures onto your server. So even if the cops take the camera, they don't have the pictures. But yeah, if you're going to be covering one of these events, you've got to be using the old tech, because more and more they're trying to figure out ways to take away from us our ability to document the wrongdoing and put it out there on the internet. And we're seeing more and more efforts at outright censorship on all the social media carriers. And to me, it's all an indication of how scared they are, that they have lost control of the minds of America. And we're getting a little ticked off learning just what the reality of our nation has been for most of our lifetime.
You know, calling down the military, basically telling them to sit back and watch, kind of gives you the message that they want this thing to go down. They want a race war. They actually want this thing to go on as a race war.
I think the plan is it's going to go out of control tomorrow. It's going to run all the way through the weekend, and then on Monday, Obama gets to get up and make a dramatic speech. And I think they're hoping it's going to engulf that GOP convention, because if they can stop that from happening, then technically, you know, Trump wouldn't be a nominee until they could reform the convention, and that gives them more time to come up with ideas to get him out. I mean, at this point, the rule book has been thrown out as far as the U.S. government is concerned. Their attitude is whatever is going to get us back in control of the American people, whatever is going to get them back into believing in us or trusting us, even if it's out of fear for their very lives, whatever is going to get us back to getting more and more of their money. Too late on that. We're out. You know, that's the way they're thinking. Whatever is going to work to keep them in wealth and power, that's what they're going to do.
Well, you know, other countries have done the same thing, and what happens there? You have a revolution, so.
Yeah, and again, I'd really hate to see a bloody revolution in the streets of America, but on the other hand, if one starts, I'm certainly not going to get in front of it and try and call it off.
Right.
Okay?
Well, thanks, Michael.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Wes in Idaho. Aloha, Wes. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Thanks for taking my call, Michael. Has Michael ever seen Pastor David James Manning of Harlem and his sermon to black people and their problems?
I generally haven't seen a whole heck of a lot of sermons in my entire life, so I'm going to have to tell you no.
Well, I've got it geared up if you want to hear it. Next, I want to go to Keith Richburg, a Washington Post reporter. In his book, Out of America, a Black Man Confronts Africa, in which he says that he is so glad that his father was taken a slave to America in the 19th century so he could have the advantages of living in America. You know of that book?
I'm not familiar with that book, but I've certainly heard that point of view before. I mean, the reality is that the descendants of the American slaves have a far better standard of living and more opportunity than the descendants of the Africans who were left in Africa. And so that has to be factored into this equation when they're screaming about slavery, slavery, slavery. Yeah, slavery was a bad thing, but you actually made out better from it, and it's time that you sort of like appreciated what you have here, okay? And I'm going to get nasty letters about that one, I know.
Michael.
Yes.
The continent right now of Africa, 1.1 billion people. Why do they not manufacture cars, airplanes, computers, trucks, buses, nothing. How about a farm tractor? You think it'd help you there, Africa, to manufacture a farm tractor? Can you do that? Why can't you do that, Michael?
There's no reason that you can't do it. The problem is the New World Order. In order to keep us globally dependent on the New World Order, they're basically going to section the world off, and each section manufactures or produces a specific category of product. And the other areas are not allowed to do that. So all the motor vehicles are going to be made over here. All the electronics are going to come from Asia. All of the food is going to come from here. The idea being that because everybody's now dependent on the rest of the world, nobody has the means and the resources to become independent. Because in order to become independent, you have to be self-sufficient. And self-sufficiency is being destroyed not only at the individual level, but at the community and the national level in order to bring about this global a New World Order. I remember when George W. Bush was making a speech on July 4th, and he said, we should rename this to Interdependence Day. And that was kind of a giveaway right then and there about what they were trying to do.
But Sweden, with just 10 million people, manufactures 300,000 cars, airplanes, computers, trucks, buses. They make the Husqvarna rifle, which is one of the best rifles around. They make the Husqvarna motorcycle, which is one of the best motorcycles around.
They're a country that loves manufacturing. And one more thought, and I'm going to have to let you go because the phone lines are loading up. The reality is that because Bretton Woods was bringing vast amounts of wealth into the U.S. economic system, they basically turned their back on manufacturing. To them, it was something that gets your hands dirty. We don't need to do that. And that, in turn, came out of the post-World War II era where America's businesses were booming because the rest of the nations had had their industrial bases bombed into rubble. And new factories were being built, and they needed managers, but they didn't dare promote from the floor because those were the people who knew how to make the stuff work. So Harvard Business School came out with a theory of scientific business management, which was a standardized set of tools and processes that could be applied, they thought, to any business endeavor. And then they created a degree program to go along with that, the Masters in Business Administration, and they generated a new generation of mid-level managers with no emotional connection to whatever it was their factories and laboratories and farms were producing. And they were all interchangeable. And that generation grew up to be the corporate leadership today that is completely disconnected from what it means to actually make or grow a product for sale. And that is the psychological dimension of why this nation has let its manufacturing decline in quantity and quality over the last 30 years, and adding to that the fact that nobody wants our GMO agriculture. That's why they've become dependent on forcing the world to go back using only the U.S. dollar for global trade and banking so the U.S. economic system can continue to profit. Okay, anyway, Wes, thanks a lot for the phone call. We're going to have to let you go here. We're going to switch to Alex in Florida, who's been waiting very, very patiently. And welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Not much, Michael. I'm going to have to come clean and tell you I've been a die-hard Democrat my whole life, and I was a Bernie or bust guy, okay? But I wanted to let you probably knew that. But anyway, I wanted to let you know that I wanted to ask you, has it always been this blatant, in your face, how mind controlling these parties are and all the false flag events that they're having?
Yes.
Has it always been this blatant?
No, it hasn't been this blatant because now they're getting reckless and careless and desperate. But it is rather interesting. Once you understand the reality of how these events happen, you look back in history and it becomes very obvious. Like the John F. Kennedy assassination or the Robert Kennedy assassination, and you recognize the same hallmarks. The problem was back then, Americans were blinded by their belief that we had a good government and an honest, accurate media, and these sorts of things, even though history shows them happening in all of the nations on Earth, Americans naively believed it couldn't happen here because we had the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. But again, from our sadder but wiser present, we look back and say, yeah, this stuff's been going on all the time. And I think it's as much as an increase in the volume of these frauds and deceptions, along with that growing public awareness, where people are just looking around and saying, this is just insane, it's spiraling out of control.
I know, it's amazing how they can shoot a president, assassinate a president, and his assassin, all while the cameras are rolling, and that's it. There's no one else that was involved, only Lee Harvey Oswald, no one else. Just close the case. It's amazing when you look back at that.
Well, if there had been an internet back then, that cover-up would have collapsed as quickly as they do now. As it was, it took something like 30 years to reach a point where 50% of Americans knew the Warren Report was a cover-up. Today, in the age of the internet, you can clock the lifespan of a government lie with an egg timer.
Yeah, and I watched some of the memorial service for the police officers that were shot in Dallas, and I will tell you, George W. Bush is lit up at that the memorial service. I know he's drunk as hell. Well, or he's on something.
It could very well be, but I mean, just looking at the way they just kept pounding that all week long. Oh, these poor police officers. Did you ever see that kind of concern given for all the thousands of innocent Americans who are gunned down by the police? You know, except for the black victims. I mean, they don't even mention the white ones hardly at all because they're pushing that political agenda. Anyway, listen, Alex.
It's out of control. It's out of control. It
very much is.
You have to wake up. You have to wake up. I will never vote Democratic again, ever.
Well,
I think the Republicans and Democrats are basically the same party.
They are.
Okay.
We need to get rid of this two-party duopoly and go back to the system the nation started with. It is out of control. I am smelling panic inside the Beltway. All right, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to switch to Fred in Iowa. Aloha, Fred. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hello, Mike. I've got a lot on my mind, but I'm going to be brief.
Okay.
Prepared to talk for an hour and 15 minutes. But divide and conquer, and I was asked the question what I want to talk about. It's race division, all right? Divide and conquer.
Yes.
Any people, any man, meaning men, a free man, regardless of his color, is creating. And free men on the earth that can communicate with other free men, we would have a much better world. Now, we hear all this about the powers that be and the powers that is. Everybody knows who the powers that be, but nobody, few know, but, well, nobody will talk about is the power that is, which I won't do right now.
Okay.
But on RBN, there are people, 2 shows in particular, and more. Now, some do it out of ignorance and just unknowledgeable. But on RBN, race division, divide and conquer is promoted right here on RBN. And I will continue to support with my money RBN. So I don't want to get accused of disliking RBN. There's aspects that I disagree with.
Well, nobody expects you to agree with anything any of our commentators say 100%. We're expecting you to be a free thinker and come to your own conclusions. And if you agreed with, for example, me 100%, I'd be very worried about you. So thank you for the support.
I hold you in a pretty high regard, Mike. Well, I don't agree with you in all aspects. That doesn't mean that I don't hold you in high regard. I do. And I'm not trying to blow smoke up your backside to appeal to you. But I am, to the degree that I am capable and try the effort I put forward, I'm a free thinker. And I get so angered about people trying to lead me and the populace, people throughout the world, lead you astray and cram crap down your mind that it exasperates me. But anyhow, I don't want to take up a lot more time today. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
All right. Well, thank you very much for that phone call. We're going to switch over to Steve in Massachusetts. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I want to talk to you about the Strong Cities Network.
Yes.
And do you think they're trying to steer us to... I know all the actions of the cops have been really out of control as of late, but people clamor so badly about the cops. It seems like Loretta Lynch is getting together with the UN and possibly have a Strong Cities Network where UN has like a police force controlling the major cities around here, which, in my opinion, is probably even worse.
Okay, well, I don't have an answer for that one right now. The issues, unfortunately, are a little more complicated, and I'm looking at these emails coming in, and I'm listening to you, where everybody is trying to reduce what's going on down to one or two key initiating points, and that's not the real world. If you have strong cities, then you have weak individuals. Anytime somebody says strong this or strong that, it's a grab for more power and authority. And that was exactly the opposite of what our founding fathers wanted. And I actually don't have anything else to share with you about that one, but thank you very much for the phone call. We're coming up on a commercial break. I want to get on back here to this Ruth Ginsburg situation. Now, she's already retracted from her statements about Donald Trump and calling him a fake. Somebody dug up this video that Ruth Bader Ginsburg, in a TV interview over in Egypt, basically trashed the Constitution that, in theory, she is paid to protect and make sure the nation is in conformance with it. And she came on out and said it's too old and should be completely disregarded, which, given that Ginsburg is in her 80s, that rationale applies to her as well. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, and I apologize if I sound a little scattered and distracted because there's a lot of stuff going on, and I'm having to keep watch on the server and various other things as well. But focus, 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 focus. We're talking about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and she sort of broke with a traditional partisan detachment of the Supreme Court in order to trash Donald Trump. Her statements about him actually came across as very rambling and not well thought out, which is not a quality you want to have on a Supreme Court justice. She's now retracted the comment, but in the aftermath of that, we're seeing a lot of people who are now remembering that Ruth Bader Ginsburg went through some very intense chemotherapy back in 2009. And the particular chemotherapy she went through causes major neural damage. It's even worse than what you would get using meth on a chronic basis. So there may be an issue of impairment there. Now, we're hearing on the corporate media that Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton are now neck and neck in the polls. It's on the Fox News. Hillary's lead has evaporated. Of course, it still depends on who you're talking to. The New York Times has them tied. NBC and Wall Street Journal are out there saying, Hillary is 9 points in the lead. Hillary's 9 points in the lead. Don't pay attention to those other people. Just trust us. You've got to vote for the winner. And so forth and so on here. Now, as you know, Stanford University came out with an analysis of election results from the Democratic primaries. And they discovered a strong correlation between how closely the official results matched the pre-election polls and whether or not the elections were done using electronic machines or old-fashioned paper ballots and hand counts. Where they used paper ballots and hand counting, the official results matched the pre-election polls. When they used the election machines, the results swung 8 to 9% in favor of Hillary Clinton, oddly enough, matching the claims by NBC and the Wall Street Journal. Now, the media is not reporting on this. The corporate media isn't reporting on it. We're reporting on it. That's our job. But there is a growing clamored in California to force a count of all those provisional ballots. Of course, they're not going to be able to count them all because down in San Diego, they were caught shredding the provisional ballots, which they're not supposed to do. Those are supposed to be held until the election is officially certified, and there are lawsuits that are seeking to prevent certification until the provisional ballots are counted. And so there's a massive phone-in campaign to the California Secretary of State, Alex Padilla, demanding all the votes be counted because there were more of these uncounted provisional ballots than votes for Hillary Clinton. Under the rules, the only times the provisional ballots cannot be counted is if there are not enough of them to change the outcome of the election. That does not apply in this case. We got to take a break for station identification. We'll be right back here with a couple more phone calls. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, and we're going to go ahead and grab a phone call from the Analog Anarchist up there in Maine. And aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha nui nui.
Aloha nui nui.
You were talking about the military oath. I'm a veteran for peace, and unless they've changed it since 1965, it is basically the same as the oath of office. You're there to defend and protect the Constitution of the United States.
Yes, that's correct.
As far as following orders, the U.S. military is different than any other. The individual troop has to determine if his order is lawful. If you're standing there and if you have to decide if you're going to shoot your fellow citizens, you have to determine if that is a lawful order or not, and you have the right and the duty to determine that.
That's absolutely right, and that was the grounds under which Lieutenant Aaron Watada refused a deployment to Iraq. He did not see that the war was legal or just, and the Army put a huge amount of pressure on him. Now, unfortunately, a lot of people in the military, they'll just follow their orders because they don't want to deal with the hassles after that. But it is rather interesting. Many years ago, I think in the 1990s, the Marines were given this test, a combat arms survey that specifically asked, will you be willing to fire on American citizens who resist national gun confiscation? And a lot of people were very alarmed that most of the Marines said, yes, we would do that. Now, I happen to know one of the Marines who was given that test. Because after he left the Marines, he got into graphic arts, and we were doing some work with him related to film and video. And he said, the reality is our superiors basically made it clear we were supposed to answer yes, but the reality is that the vast majority of the Marines were saying, no, there's no way we'd actually do that. And so in order to have a successful military put down to the American people, the government's going to have to bring in mercenaries from somewhere else. You know, like, say Syria or, you know, or any of those places who would have absolutely no sympathy for the American people.
Exactly right. Thank you. Good show. Bye.
All right. Well, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. Yeah, what's the chances of 28 pages coming out tomorrow is the same day as the Day of Rage? It's just a coincidence. No?
Well, again, we have to wait and see what's actually in the 28 pages because, frankly, I'm very, very suspicious. We have seen the U.S. government and the corporate media ignore the obvious indications of a U.S.-Israeli covert op on 9/11, and one after another, other countries get blamed for it. First Afghanistan, then Iraq, and now there's this big, big push to try and find some way to blame Saudi Arabia for it. And supposedly these 28 pages will lay the blame right at Saudi Arabia's feet. But they could have just typed up those pages last week, is the reality that we have to deal with. The fact that it's coming out on the Day of Rage may suggest that there's something in there that, they don't want you paying attention to.
I find it amazing, though. People don't realize Bin Laden was an enemy of Saudi Arabia. So if Bin Laden wasn't behind it, and Saudi Arabia maybe, and Israel, and Cheney maybe, and Bush was behind it, I want people to think about this. Then why was it covered up by Bush for 15 years and members of your government?
Well, it's easier to dismiss Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia may have been peripherally involved working for the U.S. and Israeli intelligence services. But let's go back to this idea. They've been trying to say Saudi Arabia was behind 9/11. Again, look for what should be there and isn't. And what isn't there is a reason for Saudi Arabia to do something like that. Saudi Arabia has made huge amounts of money off the petrodollar deal. They've grown very, very rich. They have invested much of that money back in the United States of America. They certainly don't want the petrodollar deal to end. They certainly don't want to give the United States government a reason to freeze and confiscate all that wealth they have parked inside the United States of America. So where's the motive for Saudi Arabia to do 9/11? And finally, common sense. If Saudi Arabia wanted to harm the United States of America, all they have to do is ask for all their money back. And the U.S. economy would crash, and the devastation would make 9/11 look like a summer picnic. And it would be perfectly legal and moral for Saudi Arabia to do that. And that's why this claim that Saudi Arabia was behind 9/11 is absolute, total USDA choice bovine excrement.
And Mike, with the petrodollar, do you think our government knows it's dead now? If these 28 pages come out tomorrow, would that mean it's dead, right?
Well, the petrodollar deal applies to all of the OPEC nations, in fact, other nations with oil. That's what the big argument with Venezuela has been. You will sell your oil only for the U.S. dollar. But so if Saudi Arabia were to suffer a revolution or something, it would certainly negatively impact that whole petrodollar scam, but it wouldn't be the end of it. Personally, I think this attempt to frame Saudi Arabia for 9/11 is a last desperate gasp by Israel to stop the world thinking that they were behind it, because we've seen all these indications, the arrested dancing Israelis, the warning to Odaigo, Netanyahu's comment about this is a good thing for Israel. I mean, their fingerprints are all over this thing. And, so they're going to say, no, we're going to blame them. We're going to blame the other people. Go hurt them. Go hurt them.
Well, when the 9/11 happened, I want people to look that there was two vans. One was stopped on the George Washington Bridge because I was home in the morning and I saw it on the news. And that van was probably headed into the tunnel.
That was the one that tested positive. Well, we were told it tested positive for explosives. There may have actually been explosives in there, and that part was classified. Because remember, when Carl Cameron did his 4-part story on the Israeli spy ring that had been uncovered just prior to 9/11, and it was the largest foreign spy ring ever found in this country, operating for Israel. And he got a U.S. government official to say that there was evidence that linked Israel to 9/11, but it was classified by the U.S. government. And this goes all the way back to what we were talking about yesterday with the USS Liberty, where President Lyndon Johnson literally came out and said he would rather see the Liberty and her crew on the floor of the Mediterranean rather than embarrass our ally in the Mideast. And so the U.S. government's been covering up for Israel's crimes all along. And we got to do a shout. What
happens when you're a lackey of God's chosen ones?
Yeah. We have to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just rejoining. We're taking phone calls. The current one is about the latest attempt to frame Saudi Arabia for 9/11, which doesn't make any sense, and you can go to the podcast to hear my reasons why for that. Anything else, Dustin?
Oh, yeah, that's why if I was Iran, stay far away from anything the U.S. offers you.
Well, I mean, they've already learned. We've got a 1-year anniversary on that Iran nuclear deal. Iran has kept all their promises, and every time the U.S. goes to keep their commitments, Congress will pass a measure blocking this and blocking that and blocking that. And so, yeah, it's a raw deal. And this is not only a message that Iran is understanding, that you cannot trust anything the U.S. government says. This is a message every other nation on earth is learning at the same time.
And people just need to look at what countries don't have a private central bank. And it's still Iran, right? Russia?
Well,
Cuba?
There's a few out there. Now, technically, Russia has a private central bank, and it's privately owned, but it's run by the Russian government for the benefit of Russia and the Russian people. And it was when Putin took over control of their private central bank that he went from being good friend and ally to #1 on the U.S. government's special high-interest targets list.
Beware the Bolsheviks.
Yes. But beware the money junkies. Beware the money junkies. Yeah. All right. Thank you very much. We're going to let you go. We're going to go to Peter in Los Angeles. Aloha, Peter. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I accidentally hung up on him.
Okay. Let's go to Ed in Florida. Aloha, Ed. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. I was just going through Bing. I guess it's kind of like sponsored by Google. And they're saying that Trump may choose, I guess his name is Mike Pence.
Yeah, it's the governor of Indiana.
Governor of Indiana.
Yes.
Do you know anything about him? I've tried to Google. All I know, just the basics. Is he a conservative, liberal?
Yeah, no, he's very conservative. He's very, very conservative. He's definitely going to bring in the evangelical vote. I think it was a really good choice. I think it was just really important that Donald Trump avoid getting saddled with one of the high-level insiders like Newt Gingrich, because that would essentially paint a target on Donald Trump's back. And
absolutely,
yeah. So Pence is a good choice.
I wanted to make sure that it was actually true. I'm glad he picked a conservative. Truly.
Yeah, I am too. And so now all we're doing is waiting to find out who Hillary's going to settle on. And apparently, Sanders is now definitely off the potential VP list. So if he was expecting to get that for endorsing Hillary, did not happen. All right, listen, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go. Now, story coming out of Investment Watch blog. There is yet another lawsuit being filed regarding the massive election fraud that's been taking place during the primaries. And apparently, this one covers electoral fraud in 11 different states. And this lawyer is saying that this lawsuit could put Bernie Sanders into the nomination. And Bernie Sanders has stated, despite his endorsement for Hillary Clinton, that he is still officially a candidate for President of the United States of America. So hang in there, Bernie. Now, very interesting article. This is from WorldNet Daily. Frida Gitas, former CNN producer and correspondent, is out there commenting on what's going on with Hillary and how Hillary's campaign is in serious, serious trouble because she's walling herself off from the media and from the issues. And her attitude is she's above all that. She's going to ignore the controversies and just come on out and go on the attack for Donald Trump because he hates the Constitution and he's going to stick the IRS on his enemies. But you can't do that in a political climate where people are looking at Hillary's trustworthiness as a major, major deciding factor. The more she refuses to deal with any of this, the worse it's going to get. Hillary's behavior screams cover-up. And for those of us old enough to remember Richard Nixon, where there's smoke, there's fire. Now, the FBI has now confirmed what we reported yesterday. All of the agents who were involved in the FBI investigation into Hillary Clinton's email server were forced to sign new additional non-disclosure agreements with very draconian punishments. They can't talk about anything that they know unless they're in a court of law under oath. They had to put that exception in there because no government official can order a subordinate not to testify in court. That's obstruction of justice. But for them to have taken this additional step only reinforces my theory. There is a far larger scandal hidden behind that email server. Rand Paul has launched a new petition to hold Hillary Clinton accountable. Everybody's got petitions out there, and the petitions are going over their signature thresholds in hours. The government's going to ignore them, but at least we're sending the message. We are trying to work within the system. We're trying to find a peaceful way to resolve this crisis, and then follow it up with that quote by John F. Kennedy. Those who make peaceful revolution impossible make violent revolution inevitable. I would hate to see that happen, but Kennedy is absolutely right. Now, down in Tennessee, Representative Marsha Blackburn is circulating a letter among her House colleagues demanding an FBI investigation into the Clinton Foundation. So far, 40 members have signed it. Now, in theory, the FBI already has an investigation into the Clinton Foundation. They even asked Comey about it. And he just clammed up about that. He didn't want to say anything about that. And remember, the FBI swooped in and took over that investigation from Larry Klayman, who had this RICO lawsuit against the Clinton Foundation in a court in Florida. Unfortunately, it was assigned to a Clinton-appointed judge who just threw it out. And at that point, the FBI stepped in and said, we'll take this off your hands. So we can expect FBI Director James Comey to come on out and say, yes, there's money laundering and drug money and corruption and pay for play and all the rest of it, but we've decided she didn't intend to do wrong, and so we are not recommending charges. But they are getting very desperate out there to try and protect Hillary Clinton. A story that came out of governmentslaves.info. Apparently over on CNN, they had a reporter, Brianna Kilar, was doing a live broadcast from Hillary's speech in Springfield, Illinois, and started critiquing her record on the air, and all of a sudden, the feed got cut. How very, very mysterious. The screen went blank. All that was left was the super title, Donald Trump is dangerous. That was the only thing that remained on the screen. Lacks a certain degree of subtlety, I would say here. Story coming out of Government Slaves again. Actually, this is being reported from Dave Hodges' show, saying that, yes, more evidence is surfacing suggesting that former board member of HSBC, James Comey, was overseeing this HSBC drug money laundering, and some of that money did go into the Clinton Foundation. That foundation is the hub. It's a giant money laundry for all of the Washington, D.C. and European elites. That's why you didn't find their names on those Panama Papers. In fact, the takedown of the Panama Papers may have been simply destroying the competition. You can't shield your wealth and avoid taxes in Panama anymore. You might as well come on up to the Clinton Foundation, because that's what they're doing. Well, James Comey is now trying to distract everybody from all of this emerging nastiness by waving the booga booga at us again, saying that because of the squeeze on ISIS in the Middle East, the terrorists are leaving and traveling around the world posing as refugees. Good reason to close the borders right there, isn't it? And Homeland Security Director Jay Johnson is saying there's general concern that ISIS is coming to the United States to commit acts of terror. Why, I would not at all be surprised if ISIS bombs that GOP convention next week and kills poor old Donald Trump. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink, say no more. They are desperate enough to try, I think, at this point. Now, Trey Gowdy, who basically ripped FBI Director James Comey last week, now he's turning his fangs on Loretta Lynch, and basically came on out and said, the appearances are very obvious. Loretta Lynch is protecting Hillary Clinton and whatever scandals behind the email server and the Clinton Foundation. And we live in a nation where the Clintons are operating above the law, and that cannot be allowed. This nation was started as a nation of laws that applied to all men equally, top to bottom. From the guy baking the bread at the bakery to the President of the United States themselves. That's the way it's supposed to work. Nobody in the United States is above the law. It was never, ever supposed to be that way. Okay, now, getting on back here. There is yet another petition out there. This one is over at change.org, petitioning for the impeachment of Attorney General Loretta Lynch for failure to do her duty. Last time I checked, it was within 140 signatures of passing its threshold. And again, nobody in the government is going to look at these petitions and do anything other than, well, we heard you. That's it. But in the eyes of the rest of the world, we, the American people, have to be seen exhausting all the peaceful procedures to resolve this issue of lawlessness at the top of our government. We have to be seen that we are still trying to play by the rules. We're trying to work within the system. And the system is broken. But remember, world sympathy will turn against whoever draws the first blood. So we have to be patient, and we have to wait, sadly, for the government to make that first move. And it does almost feel like that end scene out of V for Vendetta, doesn't it? The dominoes are about to fall. Ding. Okay, we got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, and we're going to go to the phones here. Peter in Los Angeles, thank you for calling back, and what's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Sorry I got inadvertently cut off last time I was on, but hey, I was calling for two reasons. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you just fine.
Oh, great. The first thing is in talking about the Liberty and 911, and now we're talking about Ruth Bader Ginsburg coming out. And then earlier, the discussion was about who's funding Black Lives Matter. George Soros, what's his name? From New York,
Bloomberg,
the mayor, Bloomberg. The same people who, by the way, are funding the gun grabbing efforts, Bloomberg and so on.
And Soros, of course, is behind much of that European.
Willing to open up and have violent revolution in the Ukraine, and where they're also funding that as well. But there's a common thread through all these guys: 911, the Liberty, Ginsburg, Soros, Bloomberg, and I'll let the audience draw their own conclusions about what that common thread is. So that's the first comment I have to make.
Okay.
The second one is you talked about the oath of the military oath that officers take and so on about preserving and protecting the Constitution. There's two things. We don't have a mass army anymore. And a lot of these guys that join in the reserves, and I'm a former colonel in the Army, a lot of these guys that join now in the all-volunteer Army are much like the people who join the police force. They want to go out and shoot people. That's really what they want to do. So there's that element in there, and they've gone. The government has gone to great lengths to make it.
I have to take exception to that comment. I know a lot of police. I know a lot of military. Here in Hawaii, we have the highest per capita density of military bases. There are always going to be individuals who are going to behave badly. But my experience of the military people in general is they are strict constitutionalists, and they're not happy about what's going on. And I would say that, yes, there are police who are behaving badly, but the vast majority of them joined the police to be of service to the community. And it's a classic case of, one bad apple spoiling the barrel here. And we're always seeing, Barack Obama and everybody else on this immigration saying that we shouldn't judge all Muslims because of the actions of a few individuals. We should apply that same rationale to the Army, to the police, and for that matter, to the gun owners.
Well, Mike, I would tell you that there's quite a few great cops and there's quite a few great soldiers. But I would tell you also that in the all-volunteer Army, the percentage of people, just like who are like cops who are in it because they want to exercise power and, frankly, shoot their weapons into people, is higher than it was back in the draftee Army, which when I originally went in.
It's still going to be single digits.
E4s who are PhDs and a cross-section of the American public, and that's not there anymore.
Okay.
And there's one more thing. That you don't need the government needs the Army or the military less than it used to because the fact of the drones. You can get a couple of sociopaths sitting at an Air Force base outside of Las Vegas that are murdering people all over the world every day that they know have nothing to do with defending the United States. And I would tell you that quite a few of those people would pull their little video game things on an American public as well.
Well, Peter, I'm going to have to respectfully disagree with you on two bases. First of all, a while back, Claire and I had an interesting little discussion with a group of young people who had just enlisted in the Air Force, and they were all waiting outside the recruiting office down at the bottom of the hill, and we met them because we were on our way to the Denny's, which used to be there. It isn't there anymore. And we were talking to them, and they had all joined the Air Force because there simply wasn't anything else for them to be doing in terms of employment. It's an economic draft, and none of these people look to me like somebody who wanted to go on out and mow down people. And as far as the drones, as far as the drones are concerned, there are two issues. First of all, there simply aren't that many drones right now. They're very expensive to make. Okay. Second, there has been a major retention problem keeping those pilots because they do know what they're doing is tantamount to murder. And they're trying to, they're moving to civilian contractors that they can pay huge amounts of money to, but they're still having a very high turnover. So I think your image of the military and police is a little lower than mine. Thank you for the phone call. We got to take a break for commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to turn over to the war zones, emphasis on the plural now. And basically, Amnesty International has come on out saying that the U.S.-backed so-called moderate rebels in Syria are committing war crimes, summary executions, torture, kidnapping, and the evidence for it is so overwhelming that even John Kerry is having to grudgingly admit that, okay, maybe the good guys aren't as good as we made them out to be. And the State Department is still shuffling their feet and looking at the ground, trying to explain just why, at a time when we were being told ISIS and Al-Qaeda were our mortal enemies, that Obama and Hillary Clinton's State Department were smuggling weapons to them through that consulate in Benghazi. So it's all starting to come apart. The punchline, if you will, for this is now John Kerry is approaching Russia about an agreement to merge together to deal with ISIS in Syria. And if I am reading it correctly, it means the U.S. has decided they can't raise on this busted flush. They're going to partner up with Russia, and basically everybody who was in Syria working for the United States is about to find out that loyalty to the U.S. government is a one-way street. They're going to just clean them all out there and then walk away and say, see, we were really just after the terrorists. We didn't want to get Bashar al-Assad, honest. But it represents a major setback for U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East here. Now, we are getting reports from Sputnik News. Israeli tanks and bulldozers have entered the demilitarized zone with Syria. This is an area that neither side is supposed to enter. It's just this no man's land. Israel's been caught invading it before, planting espionage devices, in some cases simply ripping down trees that were in the way of their spotting scopes. But now they have gone on in with bulldozers and tanks, and they're building heavy fortifications inside that supposedly demilitarized zone with Syria. So things are getting very, very intense down there. Now, we have been talking about the inadvisability of the U.S. getting into a war, conventional or nuclear, with other great powers like Russia and China. Because after all these years of wars and covert action, America's military stockpiles are drawn down. Their weapons are worn out. Because of the high attrition rate in combat, these weapons aren't really designed to operate for a very, very long time. Because it's expected they will be destroyed after so many hours. And they're not built to actually last. We've heard the horror stories about the F-22, the F-35, the Independence-class littoral combat ships, the Freedom-class littoral combat ships, the problem they're having with the Gerald Ford aircraft carrier. They can't get that to work. And now we have this report being reported in the Los Angeles Times, no less, saying that right now the U.S. missile defense system is unable to protect the public were North Korea to launch an attack, assuming North Korea can actually get one off the pad in one piece. Now, if our U.S. missile defense system can't actually protect us from a North Korean missile. It is absolutely useless if we get into a shooting war with Russia and China, who now have nuclear systems with maneuverable terminal stage vehicles. The entire U.S. ballistic missile defense system is based on a doctrine of the incoming threat following a predictable ballistic path. And the new generation of Russian and Chinese weapons don't do that. They whip back and forth, they corkscrew, they bob up and down, they dipsy-doodle. And you can't predict where they're going to be when your kill vehicle reaches them. And that's a very, very good reason to not get into a nuclear war. And I'm not just saying that because I can look out this window at a first strike nuclear target. Okay, that's part of it, yes. One nuclear weapon can ruin your whole day. Now, earlier I was talking about how we are at the one-year anniversary of the Iran nuclear deal. Iran has kept all of their commitments and promises, and the U.S. keeps reneging on the deal. Now, Obama is out there trying to make it look like we're keeping our side of the P+1 agreement, but inevitably Congress is throwing monkey wrenches in there. U.S. House Republicans passed legislation to ban heavy water purchase from Iran. That was part of the deal, in part to get the heavy water out of Iran. But their masters in Tel Aviv said, no, you don't do business with Iran, not without our permission. And so the House passed the resolution. Obama is threatening a veto. But if Tel Aviv wants it, that pretty much guarantees a veto-proof majority in that House. Because our Congress couldn't get together and agree on what key to whistle Dixie in. But when it comes to Israel, it's always near unanimity. Now let's look at the economic news here. We've been hearing disquieting rumors of bank runs in Italy, ATMs being shut down in Taiwan. And so there's this article out of Investment Watch Block. Italy's banking sector is looking increasingly vulnerable. Now, Italy is Europe's third strongest economy after Britain and Germany. And of course, Britain is now looking like they're actually going to complete their pullout. So Italy is supposedly Europe's third strongest economy, and they're in serious, serious trouble. And there's concern it could go under. It could start defaulting, triggering bank runs, credit rating downgrades, and because of globalism and derivatives, it's a threat to the entire wider European Union and even to banks here in America. France especially is heavily exposed to the fate of the Italian banks. And I remember some years ago where I said one of the arguments against globalism was to keep barriers in place so when there's a problem in one part of the planet, it doesn't take the rest of the planet down with it. It was because of economic globalism that the collapse of the mortgage-backed security fraud in the United States back in 2008 became a global catastrophe. And they didn't learn from that. Citigroup blew itself up with derivatives in 2008. They didn't learn anything. They're up to their neck in derivatives yet again. They think it's great fun. Citigroup has more derivatives than 4,000 U.S. banks combined. But Citibank has an ace in the hole because you have to remember Congress changed the rules of banking to allow losses from derivatives to be dropped onto you, the American taxpayer. That's the change. So the Wall Street casino can go back to playing with derivatives, and when they win, they get to keep it, and when they lose, you get to pay for it. I mean, imagine a real gambling casino out there in Nevada, and it's got a special set of rules. When you play at the tables and you win, you put the money in your pocket, you go home. When you hit gambler's ruin and you've lost everything, management says, don't worry about that. They pass a hat among all the workers at the casino. The bellhops, the clerk at the front desk, the cooks, the maids, everything. Take up a collection and bring it back and say, here's more money to play with. Of course you're going to go back to playing. When you win, you win. When you lose, you don't suffer. And that's the way Wall Street's been set up. Cargo volume at Chinese ports is now at a 7-year low. Ordinary people don't have money to buy things at the store. The money's all concentrated up at the top, and there aren't enough money junkies alive to go around to all the shopping malls and buy up all the flat panel TVs and whatever else it is that they're selling to keep the consumer economy going. And that's why we're seeing retailers close and factories close and supply chain companies going out of business. The economy is lopsided. For an economy to function and be healthy, currency must flow at all levels of society and into all necessary sectors of investment, not just be pooled up in one giant stinking tower over the homes of the money junkies. All right, let's turn to the refugee crisis. And again, we're seeing indications of a political agenda at work, because Germany's tax-funded public broadcaster, NDR, came out with what they laughingly call a documentary about the New Year's Eve sex attacks up in Cologne. And it was done with illustrations rather than photos. And the illustrations make it look like the attackers of the women were all white Germans. That's the new propaganda. Oh, no, it's only the racists saying that the migrants did the attack. It was just ordinary Germans that did all these attacks. Well, did you have attacks like this taking place before the refugees showed up? That's the flaw in their logic. Now, apparently Germany is so intent on preserving the propaganda in support of this massive influx of Middle Eastern refugees into Europe. They're starting to basically act like the Nazis all over again. German police are now raiding the homes of anybody who posts negative comments about the migrants on Facebook. They've declared comments about the problems caused by the refugees as illegal far-right opinions. Opinions are now crimes in the Fourth Reich. Sig Heil, Sig Heil, Sig Heil, Sig Heil. Now, there's a video that we put up on the main page of What Really Happened, and the title to look for is Paris Been Destroyed by Globalists' Forced Migrations. And it's just a video montage. The other day we were talking about comments coming out of Paris where it's just not as it used to be. There's a climate of fear. People don't want to go outside. One of the most beautiful cities on earth, and it's being turned into a slum. And you need to look at this video. There's the reality. And it's even starting to inconvenience the rich and powerful and the elites, because Switzerland shut its border to the migrants. And as a result, they're starting to sort of pool around the Lake Como area, which is a beautiful resort kind of area for the rich and famous. People like George Clooney and Madonna have places there. And so they're having to deal with the aftermath of this nonsense. Might change their opinion a little bit. Now, not too long ago up in Idaho, there was a very ugly incident where a 5-year-old girl was sexually assaulted by some of the refugees. And again, we're seeing indications of a cover-up. The authorities are refusing to allow the family to see the police report or the medical report. And the mother of the girl is saying her family is being treated like they're the criminals by local authorities and media. And she's not being allowed to read the actual police report or even the medical records. So, of course, the White House is going to welcome 10,000 Syria refugees this year. Won't it be fun? Especially those ones with the infectious tuberculosis. Now, here's an interesting article came out of Discus.com. Has the corporate media damaged free speech? And it's pointing out something a lot of people have noticed. When you go to the websites of the corporate media, and there's a story, and you're supposed to be able to publicly comment on it. And what they've done through careful study is established the corporate media outlets will delete comments that challenge the veracity or the point of view of the story. And I've had this happen to me a lot of times. In fact, I'm outright banned on a lot of corporate media websites. They don't want to hear from me. They only want to hear from the people who believe the way they do. So much for fair and balanced. We report, you decide, so forth and so on. Let's talk about political correctness. It is, like the police, like the election fraud, spiraling totally out of control. And the political correct idea is that you should constrain your thoughts, your words, and your behavior out of concern it might offend any one of the 7 billion people who inhabit planet Earth. And that's an absolute impossibility, in part because we have a huge chunk of the human population whose only sense of self-worth comes from always finding something to be offended about. So now, over in Great Britain, up in Nottinghamshire, the police are starting to treat wolf whistling as a hate crime. It's a form of sexual harassment. When you do a wolf whistle, which means you find a woman particularly attractive. Actually, the ones who are annoyed about that are the women who aren't being whistled at. But they're going to turn around and say, if nobody's allowed to whistle at a pretty girl, then we can all pretend that we're pretty girls. And it really is out of control. And this stuff is all a matter of fashion. It's all a matter of fashion. And I learned that back in the late 1980s. And the militant feminism, which really culminated in the 1990s with all this all men are rapists nonsense, was just starting to take hold. And they were coming out with this thing that you weren't supposed to tell a woman she was beautiful. You're not supposed to flirt with her. You know, you're being a male pig or whatever, a male chauvinist pig. That was it. And so, okay, we minded our own business. And then I was sent to Europe by the company I was working for to set up a production shop for a client there. And especially in Germany, what a difference. The women in the office expected you to flirt with them and tell them they were pretty. And if you did not, it was a guarantee your paperwork, if it was ever done at all, was going to be at the bottom of the stack. These things are purely matters of fashion and propagandizing a population that they should act a certain way in order to be hip and modern and trendy and the rest of it. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And it looks like the unrest in France has finally broken through on the American corporate media. Story just now breaking. Apparently there was this crowd of people, and a truck ran right through them and kept right on going. 30 people are dead, many more wounded. It's just now breaking now. But this is the first mention in the American media of the major unrest that's been all over France for the week. Millions and millions of people have been in the streets of France, angry over austerity, angry over the labor reform, angry over the decreasing civil rights, loss of freedom of speech. And they'll probably pin this on ISIS or something like that. But it reminds me very much during the Egyptian revolution that ousted Mubarak. There were crowds of protesters, and trucks being driven by government people were just plowing through them. And right now, it does seem reminiscent of that. All right, we're going to keep an eye on that going into the next hour. It does feel like the whole world is just on the verge of a single giant planetary revolution. And that might not be a bad thing. I just would have preferred a more peaceful way to go about it. Now, getting on back to, apparently this was an attack on a Bastille Day celebration. I'm just now getting that here. So, and it could be another false flag terror attack. Oh, it ISIS did this. It's ISIS bad, and so forth and so on. So we'll keep an eye on that story. We were talking about political correctness and how out of control it has gotten. And there's been another incident involving the restrooms at Target. Apparently, a transgender woman started out as a guy, born as a guy, has a man's DNA, got surgically modified, was using the women's changing room at a Target and was caught taking pictures of other naked women and got arrested. And they booked him under the name Sean Patrick Smith. So, I mean, what a ridiculous situation they are talking about here. We've got so many things wrong with this country. The economy, the wars, the loss of our Bill of Rights. And the Democrats think opening up restrooms for free choice is a big political win. It's nonsense. And finally, this one is a little heartbreaking, where, and this is over at OpposingViews.com, there was apparently a feminist who inadvertently became pregnant and decided she was going to have the baby. That's good. Until the ultrasound revealed the baby was a boy, and at that point she felt it was okay to abort the kid. And she said specifically, I couldn't bring another monster into the world. So it looks like they're trying to recycle that 1990s militant feminazi stuff to further divide our nation against itself. We'll be right back after station identification. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Go ahead and give us a call. And obviously this news story from France is pretty much taken over the entire media. Everybody's covering it right now, trying to find out just what was going on here. From the description of the accident, actually it doesn't sound like it was an accident, because reportedly the truck just kept right on going, plowing through the crowd. And so this took place in Nice during a Bastille Day celebration. And we've already got some YouTube videos up about that. So actually it looks like Fox News is already pulling away from this. So we'll keep an eye on that and find out what's going on with that whole story. Okay, now then, we were talking about political correctness. We've been talking about how you've got the Black Lives Matter group out there implying white lives don't matter. You've got that last story about the feminist who aborted a baby because she couldn't bring another monster, meaning a male, into the world. And there was an article that came out in avoiceformen.com commenting on how Facebook has now started deleting men's rights pages. And that was also something that we saw back in the 1990s at the height of the militant feminazi situation, where the media, women are victims, men are monsters, they're rapists, and that's all they are, and was going on. And people who were trying to get out there and say, look, it's not, we're not bad people. There are bad individuals, but we're not inherently evil just because we're men, and ran into a lot of censorship because a political agenda was being sold at that time. And, I'm trying to remember who was president back when all of this stuff was going on. So this appears to be more of that divide and conquer. And again, it goes all the way back to the 1960s, when Richard Nixon was using the FBI's COINTELPRO program to turn the American people against each other, black versus white, men against women, young against old, whatever they could do. They went after the Native American rights movement. So let's talk a little bit here about computers. Apparently, there's a new major problem with Microsoft. Every version of Windows that's out there has been discovered to have a critical security flaw. And it has to do with the fact that the print spooler service does not validate the print drivers when installing a printer. Now, this probably ties into these pop-ups you're constantly seeing on the malware sites saying, you need to install a new driver, you need to install this, you need to install that. And frankly, at this point, with cyber criminals running rampant over our society, and the U.S. government clearly uninterested in dealing with this problem, is you should get your system stable, and at that point you lock it down. You don't allow any more patches or updates or anything in there at all. And you should never, ever download, certainly not a driver, from a source you do not know. And now we understand this is a vector by the security criminals, because the print spooler service on Microsoft, every version, doesn't check the print driver. Just goes ahead and runs it. The more complicated they make these operating systems and applications, the more vulnerabilities there are. We were talking about a story, I think it was just yesterday, where they said most antivirus software these days is just wholly ineffective. That might even be by design. Now, apparently the U.S. government has now authorized Facebook and Twitter and YouTube to censor any content critical of Muslims. And again, we need to be careful. Are they talking about Muslims or the refugees? Because it looks like they're still trying to protect that refugee operation, to blend us all together. Now, we've all heard about ransomware. This is, your computer gets infected, it encrypts all of your data, you send them money, they send you the key, you get your data back. The official FBI recommendation is, go ahead and pay the ransom, we can't do a thing about it. Now, a lot of private citizens have been able to break these keys and make them available for free to try and thwart the ransomware. There have been some serious, serious problems, like hospitals getting infected, and all their patient records all of a sudden being unavailable. This can kill people. But the FBI and the NSA and the CIA, that's not a big deal. You know, we've got more important things to do, like protecting Hillary Clinton from prosecution. But there's a new variation on the theme, and it's called Ranscam. And it's malware that will infect your computer, and it will just delete everything. Flat out delete it, and then it puts up a sign saying you've been hit by ransomware, send money to this address. And you send the money, and of course you don't get the key back, because the key wouldn't do you any good. It's a $125 ransom, and there's no way to get your files back. They don't need to provide one. You know, with the FBI saying, go ahead and pay the ransom, why should they bother? It's absurd. It is very, very absurd. There we are. Okay, now then. Turns out over at Citigroup, they had a bug in their code, which apparently for 15 years was handling legitimate transaction detail, falsely or incorrectly labeling it as test data and ignoring it. And when they finally tracked down what was going on, it wound up costing Citigroup $7 million. Money that should have been paid that wasn't, plus who knows what penalties are going on. Now, the FBI has come on out there trying to defend its malware. And the FBI has come out with one of the most absurd statements I've ever heard. The FBI is saying that the FBI's malware isn't really malware because the FBI is good, which is kind of a hard argument to support after James Comey gave that get-out-of-jail-free card to Hillary Clinton. And those of us who've been around since the days of COINTELPRO, and even Vince Foster, we know the FBI isn't good. Remember that Asia-Pacific Economic Conference took place up in Seattle. And again, this was in the 1990s. And it was a huge, huge scandal. Need to do a quick shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just rejoining. We're talking about computer tech issues and malware and spying. We're also waiting for more information about this horrible tragedy, or it appears to be a deliberate crime, where a truck crashed through a crowd of Bastille Day celebrants in France and killed at least 30 of them. So we're talking about how the FBI is out there saying that its malware isn't really malware because the FBI is good, and this is in part trying to convince virus scanner and malware companies to specifically exempt the FBI's spyware from the scans, which many of them have been doing all along. There was a big stink over the FBI's Magic Lantern spyware, and the antivirus companies put an exception in their data files, at which point the real cyber criminals started making their malware look like the Magic Lantern in order to get past. It's a very, very convoluted situation. But the FBI is basically trying to position themselves, we're the good guys, therefore our malware isn't malware. I don't know what they're going to call it. But we know the FBI isn't good. And I was starting to talk about this conference that took place in Seattle, Washington back in the 1990s, the Asia Pacific Economic Conference. They meet every 2 years. They bop all over the Pacific Rim. It was here in Hawaii. It's been here in Honolulu a couple of times since we moved here. And in the Seattle APEC, there was a big scandal because U.S. government agents, including the FBI, were caught hacking into the computers of conference attendees, not to fight crime, not to fight terror, but to steal business secrets, which were then given to then-President Bill Clinton's cronies to give them an edge up in the negotiations. So no, the FBI isn't good. They don't have good intentions. And James Comey just sort of confirmed that for the majority of the American people. All right, let's take a phone call. Tom in Florida. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, good afternoon. How you doing there? I would like to talk about, first off, I do want to say that what's going on with Ginsburg is unbelievable. What I really want to say is Robert Revolt's done right about almost everything he does on his show, but with Ginsburg talking to Trump, I don't think that's ever happened with the Supreme Court. But I will say this about when you're talking about the FBI. What's going on? I think, isn't it Aberdeen, Hillary's best friend and her husband, Jeffrey Weiner, or the guy Weiner?
Anthony Weiner.
Excuse me, Anthony Weiner. I think Anthony Weiner is probably looking at those emails, and I really think that's what's going on. That he was looking at the emails, Anthony Weiner. So I think that's what's going on here. That's why their FBI was so embarrassed they couldn't handle it. So they probably saw some stuff that Weiner might have saw in. Of course, Uma's his wife, and who knows what kind of dirt really the FBI saw. They just freaked out over the whole thing. That's why they're trying to cover it up the best they can for Hillary. Well, Weiner is probably also looking at those emails.
Maybe he did, maybe he didn't, but I don't think that's big enough to justify this kind of a cover-up here, in that meeting with Bill Clinton and Loretta Lynch and everything. I am still convinced that Hillary Clinton was in all probability replaying the 1996 Chinagate scandal, selling U.S. secrets to foreign interests in exchange for donations. And Bill Clinton got caught doing it in 1996. Congress was trying to investigate, but then the White House email server crashed and erased over 1 million subpoenaed communications, and golly gee shuckies, the backup system had been manually shut off. So those investigations stopped dead in their tracks, and I think it's very reasonable today to ask if Hillary Clinton was using her weak email server to deliver classified intelligence secrets to foreign interests who then made donations to her so-called charitable foundation. And this supposed anonymous FBI source that's been out there posting on the web is saying there was stuff on Hillary's email server that she was not actually supposed to have at all, because they were special access programs that even the Secretary of State was not supposed to be in possession of. And all of the special access programs' data is kept on isolated, secure computer networks that do not connect with the Internet, which means somebody put this information on a flash drive and walked it out of the secure area in order to put it on Hillary's email server. And so
Michael, can I say one more thing, Michael? Michael, can I say one more very important thing that I can tell you that happened when you're talking about with the Miami Herald?
Yeah.
In the Miami Herald, the Broward Sun Sentinel, they talked years ago when Bill Clinton was the president. I'll never forget. I can try to find the article. I think I might have saved it, or my friend had. That the Chinese were so far behind in their rocketry with the gyros that Bill Clinton sold out the secrets of the gyro systems for those rockets to be on target. And it was Bill Clinton administration, or Billy Blythe, if you'd like to call him that. It was his administration allowed those gyros to be sold to the Red Chinese. Okay?
Yes.
And they were like 20, 25 years ahead. As soon as they got those secrets, look at now, they got some of the ballistic missiles. Then Clinton was behind that. And that's probably what's going on with this email scandal with the FBI. And they don't know what to do. They got to try to cover this up. That's my opinion.
Well, it's going to be a hard time covering it up because if we actually get into a nuclear war with China and those Chinese missiles are actually able to hit the targets they're being aimed at, we know why. We know who sold that out to China. We know who's behind that. Sudden improvement in accuracy.
Bill Blank is behind that.
Okay. Okay? All right.
Yes, Michael. And thank you. Great show. And like I said, Ginsburg, there's their whole proof in the pudding what's going on in the whole United States right now. 2% telling the asphalt's telling the gasoline what to do.
Well, I think... okay, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go here. The fact that Ginsburg did that, and she did break a tradition of the Supreme Court not getting into partisan politics, to me it's another indicator of the institutional fear that is surging all around that beltway. They know they have lost the trust and the faith of the American people. They don't know how to get it back. They're in a panic, and unfortunately, desperate people will take desperate chances, and we have to be on guard for that. Okay, let's go to another phone call. Ralph in New York City. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. How you doing? I love your show. I admire your work. Mike, we'll ask you a question. On the highways of upstate New York, there's a lot of UN trucks and a lot of UN activity going on upstate New York and further up going to the Canadian border. And do you think that there's these conspiracies that the UN or the country is possible?
Well, again, going on back to that combat arms survey, despite the very positive numbers they got, I'm sure they went back and double-checked and realized your average American soldier, sailor, airman, airperson, is really going to have a hard time pulling the trigger on their fellow citizens. Even if they take the soldiers from California to try and control the people in New Hampshire and they don't know any of those people there, it's still going to be very difficult. And so I think that, yes, the U.S. is looking at bringing in foreign troops to suppress the domestic population, which, by the way, was the maneuver that cost Charles I his head, bringing in Scottish troops to control the British people.
Wow. So I mean, and on top of it, you think that there's a lot of these conspiracy theories that Obama could take a third term in office and suspend the elections? Is that possible also on top of that?
Well, it's always possible when you have a government that's not playing by the rules. The question is it really practical in the current political climate where so many people are suspicious of everything the government does? They might try and wind up in a spectacular fail. Because history has shown every once in a while, despite all the careful planning and preparation, rulers will make that one mistake too far. Charles I being one example, Ceausescu being another, Mussolini, Louis XVI, happy Bastille Day again. Every once in a while, rulers will make that one big fatal mistake that pushes the people across that line into saying, okay, enough is enough is enough. With King George III, it was that Currency Act.
So the ball game is practically over on both sides. He could concern these foreign troops occupying the country, and also thinking we have a Second Amendment in this country. I figure they could throw away our rights. But there's a lot of Paul Reveals out here that they can't be ready. They know what's about to go down very soon. But the masses of the population are like sheeple. What's your opinion on this one?
Yeah, well, I like to sort of consider myself as a modern variation of Paul Revere, riding down the town and going, the British are coming, and then people lean out and say, who cares? And I stop and say, okay, well, could I interest you in some Revere wear? And sorry about that. I'm getting punchy at this stage of the game. There's no question this is a time of chaos. And I think everybody can look at it. I think everybody understands something has gone horribly wrong with the nation. They may not know exactly what to the detail that we do. But at this point, it's very hard to find anybody, not on a government paycheck, who's willing to say everything is just fine and dandy. It's that opinion is just not out there.
Well, the convention's next week over in Cleveland. Anything is possible, huh?
Anything is possible. If there's rioting that breaks out tomorrow, could easily go through the weekend, could easily go into next week. Again, the people who are terrified of Donald Trump, who knows what they're going to try.
Exactly. All right, Mike. Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Here, we're going to let you go. I got a comment in the chat room about this new Pokemon game, Pokemon Go, and apparently it's already causing all kinds of problems. And for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, there's an incredibly successful game franchise called Pokemon, where you search the world and capture these little critters who are the Pokemon, and you gain power and skill, and you work your way to the top. There's a new variant, and it does not come out on any of the PlayStations. It's available for cell phones, so even available for free. And it uses your camera, and you look onto the screen and you see what's in front of the camera, and it imposes the Pokemon characters over the real world view. So instead of sitting at a console and playing, you're actually having to travel around your home, your town, and so forth, looking for these critters to capture, which sounds like a good way to get people to exercise, but there's a downside, and I'll mention what that is when we come back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, and we're talking about the Pokemon Go craze, and it's taking off like wildfire. And as I said, the first thing you think is, oh, great, you're going to get out of the chair. You're going to walk around. You're going to get exercise and everything. And there have been a whole lot of new applications that will use the front camera and screen and impose something over it, like theodolite applications. I have a couple of astronomy programs that overlay information over the real view of the sky, and it's a very powerful technology. But in this case, it's this game, and the idea is that while you're looking at your cell phone, you're wandering around trying to pick up these monsters. And I don't know the fine details of the game because I don't play computer games as a rule, other than flight simulators. I love flight simulators. But there is a problem, and that is the same problem that you have with anybody who is distracted by a cell phone when they're doing something else. And there are already reports of accidents involving people who are watching the phone and stepping off the top of a staircase they didn't notice, or colliding with people, and in some cases even drivers, which is really, really, really dumb. But that's what's going on with this whole Pokemon Go craze, and it may wind up with the game's creators facing class action and civil litigation. They didn't really think it all the way through. It sounds like a fun app for people who are into computer games. And as I said before, it sounds like a great way of getting people out of their chairs and actually getting exercise walking around, which was also what they call it. Geocaching was going to do that. And my brother and his son were real big into that for a while. Now, getting on back to the evolving situation in France, the local media in France are already saying it was a terror attack. Not really sure. It was Bastille Day. Everybody was celebrating. Could be a tragic accident. One thing we do know is the driver of the truck is himself also dead. The reason they're claiming terror attack was people were hearing the sounds of gunfire, which I wouldn't be all that certain about, because the crowd that got hit by the truck were watching a Bastille Day fireworks show. So the circumstances are very, very confused, and we don't really know what's going on here. I don't know. Maybe the driver of the truck was playing Pokemon Go. Weirder things have happened. Phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Okay, getting on back to the news. Theresa May is already making significant changes to the British cabinet. She's bringing in one of the pro-Brexit people to start the actual process of detaching from the European Union. And she's actually abolished the Department for Energy, which was basically their climate change people, their global warming people. And she shut it down, and of course immediately everybody who was getting funded for human-caused global warming is saying, this is dangerous, this is plain stupid, it's terrible, it's deeply worrying. What am I going to do for work now if I can't scream about global warming? Blah, 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 blah. Still getting reports from down in Australia, record winter down there. Ski resorts are open, they're having a good time down there for snow sports. Okay, now then, Time Magazine has come on out with an article attacking immigration detention center workers who refused to get vaccines for this sudden measles outbreak, ignoring that it is the migrants coming in with the measles who are actually spreading the disease, if not the vaccine itself. But they're still out there pushing this thing. Buy the medicine, stick it in your arm, give us money, we're so desperate for money. Here, everything we had in the warehouse, we blended it all together. Stick it in your arm, give us money. Or you're the bad people. Now, there is a peer-reviewed study that just came out. It was published over at jpandS.org. And it is a peer-reviewed article and included the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, or rather challenges them, saying, CDC says the vaccines are all safe, you should just take them, mix them all together and shove them in. But a review of data from the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System shows a very strong correlation that when vaccines are mixed together and administered as one shot, you are far more likely to see the adverse reactions that could lead to hospitalization, death, and autism. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're following this story coming out of France. They're now saying the death toll from this incident is now to 60. And apparently this truck just ran right through this crowd and kept right on going. Now, we had a report before that the driver of the truck was dead. They're now getting all these statements from witnesses who are saying that they thought there was a gunman. But again, there was a fireworks show. It was just ending, or it had just ended at this point. So a lot of confusion. But could be road rage. We know that France has just had this horrible anger going on over the Labor Reform Act. And the French officials are saying that this is an attack of some kind. And I'm sure by tomorrow they'll have found some way to put it on a politically expedient target. But it could have just been somebody who was drunk on this national holiday. And we don't really have enough information. I got to tell you, my gut call on this one, and I could be wrong. I'm not going to place any money on this. My gut call is this is a road rage traffic accident. It's not. It doesn't have all the components of being a real terror attack, which always has multiple parties and somebody to blame immediately. One thing that is notably absent in all the media coverage is the truck itself, which supposedly they have because the driver is dead. But we'll just keep watch on this through the night. But obviously the corporate media now has something else to report on that is not Hillary's email server or James Comey's get-out-of-jail-free card or Loretta Lynch's refusal to prosecute and her meeting with Bill Clinton and on and on and on and on. Now, getting on back to the medical situation, I kind of got cut off by the commercial break here, talking about this new report that has come on out. Based on data from the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, it shows a very strong correlation that when vaccines are blended together and administered as a single shot, you are far more likely to see adverse reactions that lead to hospitalization, death, and autism. And here is the payoff on that. At no time during the development of these vaccines did anybody actually do any studies to see what happens when you blend these highly volatile chemicals together. Now remember, when you have a vaccine, you have the hopefully attenuated pathogen and adjuvants selected to provoke a reaction that will trick the immune system into building antibodies to the pathogen. Unfortunately, it also builds antibodies to the adjuvants, like peanut oil. That's where that peanut anaphylaxis epidemic has come from. because peanut oil is something you are supposed to eat, not inject into your bloodstream directly. But what happens when you're basically combining 6 or 8 shots is you're combining 6 or 8 clumps of adjuvants all at once, and that's a tremendous, tremendous burden to be putting on a young body. And nobody ever checked for this. Just like over on the GMO side, when they started tinkering with genes for Roundup-ready corn, they didn't look for how the alterations might affect other parts of the organism. And again, a very benign example of this unexpected side effect is in the Roundup-ready corn, which along with producing the corn that can survive the glyphosate, the stalks of the corn were much tougher than the natural variety, so corn farmers had to buy Kevlar-belted tires for their tractors. And it shows a high degree of recklessness to put these products out with inadequate, insufficient testing. Now, over in Japan, there are now 64 women suing in 3 different Japanese courts over permanent harm they suffered from the cervical cancer vaccines. And this, too, has been a problem all over the world. This vaccine is being pushed on young girls who are not sexually active. It's a 5-year shot. It requires a booster, which is basically a repeat. And so this vaccine that's being sold to them, and it's an expensive shot, wears off before they're even likely to be exposed. But it's just a big, big moneymaker. Now, speaking of other moneymakers, the FDA has finally come out with a warning that fluoroquinolone, I got it right, fluoroquinolone antibiotics can cause permanent nerve damage. I don't know why they don't ban this outright, but they've issued the warning. Now, this is sold under the brand names of Levaquin, Cipro, Avelox, and they are taken by an estimated 26 million Americans each year. And the FDA directive says you have to put a stronger warning on the package, which most people don't actually bother reading. When the FDA actually comes out and issues a warning, you know the drug is really toxic and very, very dangerous. So why was this stuff allowed on the market in the first place? Well, there's a very interesting little story about that. Because former FDA Commissioner Margaret Hamburg has been named in a massive racketeering lawsuit that she used her influence to get Levaquin approved because her husband ran a hedge fund that was heavily invested in the drug's manufacturer. You see how this stuff all starts to work now? That's how it works. They're interested in the money. They're not really interested in your health and safety. In fact, the entire medical industrial complex would fall apart if we all got healthy. And that's really what it is. Their entire profit structure is based on the American people being constantly chronically ill and requiring costly treatment of symptoms. They need us to be sick. They need us to be harmed. Now, apparently, one of the directors over at the CDC has been forced to resign because this executive was caught aiding a Coca-Cola representative in seeking to influence the World Health Organization to relax recommendations on the intake of sugar limits. So it really was a corrupt system. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. Well, I must have said something that annoyed somebody. My server is under major attack again. It will bounce back, don't worry. It always does. Now, we've been talking about clergy sexual abuse, politicians who love to play around, Jeffrey Epstein and the rest of it. And there's a new scandal out there. This is being reported by ABC News. Apparently, there is a big scandal going on where 2,400 doctors here in the United States of America have been sanctioned for sexually abusing their patients. And apparently this new report, for the first time, surveyed records from all 50 states and said the problem may be as far-reaching as that scandal involving the Catholic priests. I don't know, I think the Catholics are way ahead. Now, the state medical boards, which oversee the positions, apparently allowed more than half of the sanctioned doctors to keep their licenses, even though the accusations of sexual abuse were determined to be true. This came out from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Now, this nation is just going crazy. And I don't think it's inherent in the American people. I don't think it's inherent in our makeup. We've lost our moral compass. There's no question about that. But there may be another reason, and it's one I've mentioned before, and that is those prescription antidepressants, psychiatric medication. We know they have adverse effects. We know that people who are taking SSRIs and similar medications can all of a sudden have sudden, unexplainable urges to commit mass violence or even harm themselves. And there's a website, ssristories.org, that you need to look at, where they have hundreds and hundreds of documented cases. There have been court cases where people have committed crimes, and the court has ruled you're not guilty by reason of the fact that you were under the influence of this medication, based on the medication's case history. Now, ssristories.org focuses on those cases that resulted in death or mass shootings or suicide. But I rather doubt it's that clear-cut, because we did our own little analysis and discovered that the per capita incidence of domestic violence started heading upward at the same time these medications started being sold to the mass American public. And right now, about 25% of America are on these medications. And it is known that they basically remove inhibitions. They encourage impulsive behavior to just go with the first thought. And so it may be time to go beyond mass shootings and suicide and look at the correlation between these medications and domestic violence, the correlation of these medications and bar fights, correlation of these medications and road rage. I'm sure it's a continuum. And we know our politicians are on these medications. We know they all took a whole bunch of that Cipro back on 9/11, which we now know causes permanent nerve damage. We may be drugging ourselves crazy with these medicines. Because I'm old enough to remember when I was a kid, yeah, there were always some crazy people around. We had one summer when I was living in New Hampshire. We had the summer of the firebug. Somebody was going around just setting arson fires, and that stuff happens. But it's so widespread now. And I don't think it's just because we've lost our moral compass, or maybe our moral compass has become drugged. And we already know that nobody wants to look at any new product going on the market for adverse effects, because then that's a reason for it not to be sold. They weren't checking for adverse effects of blending vaccines together. They didn't check for unexpected side effects in other parts of GMO organisms. The really amazing thing about SSRIs is they've now determined that they don't actually work the way they're supposed to. So it's all downside. And these things are also very heavily addictive. It's a wonderful product for the medical industrial complex. But in looking around, people, for the most part, tend to be good. There are always going to be bad people and crazy people. But should we medicate ourselves to turn us from being good people into crazy people? in the name of corporate profits? I really don't think so. And the government knows there's a danger. There are now some states here in the country where if you are filling out the form for a gun permit or a gun license to pass the background check, they'll actually ask, are you on prescription antidepressants? And if you are, your application for a gun permit will be refused. They know there is a problem. They're not going to do anything about it because it makes money. And when you live in a country where the government is so deeply in debt that it abandons all other duties and responsibilities and considerations, you're going to see exactly this kind of situation happening. These are the evils that infect nations that have descended into fascism. Money is good. What makes money is good. What loses money is bad. People don't matter. Remember when Obamacare first came out and the guy who set it all up said, the plan is that you're all going to die at 75. Because after that, you're just a useless eater. We can't make money off of you. You can't make any products. At 75, you've had enough of a life. You should just go away. Shades of Logan's Run. Of course, in Logan's Run, the kill-off date was 30. But we're getting into that same mindset. We're going to keep you alive while you're useful and we can get work product from you and breed the next generation. And once you can't do any of that stuff, why should we keep you around? The nation's going crazy. It really, really is. Between money junkieism and poisoning our mind with these legal pharmaceuticals. These things are actually more dangerous than the illegal drugs like marijuana. Remember, we were talking about Justice Ginsburg. The chemotherapy she was on for her pancreatic cancer is more damaging to the brain than somebody who's using meth, which is bad enough as it is. Okay, now, over near Rome, there's a volcano, Colli Albani, and it was thought to be extinct. Now scientists are saying, well, it seems to be coming to life, but not to worry. It's probably not going to erupt for another 1,000 years. But when it does, it'll be a new Mount Vesuvius, and I'm sure they're already lining up for new research grants to go on out and keep an eye on this particular volcano. I think they ought to be looking a little more closely at Yellowstone, Cumbre Vieja, for example, and even down here on the Big Island. Now, researchers have found, this is over at Natural Blaze, researchers have found out that the principal driving force for the harmful algae blooms in the Great Lakes is glyphosate, runoff from farm fields that use the Roundup pesticide. And it runs off and it gets in the water, and this is what's triggering these harmful algae blooms. And of course, when these algae blooms happen, it's harmful for everything living in the habitat. Have you ever noticed that the environmentalists are always concerned about your plastic bags and your lifestyle, but never about the damage to the environment caused by government and corporations? It's a little bit of an institutional blindness. We have to take a break for commercials. We'll be back with the last segment of our program today after these few words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're keeping an eye on this tragic situation over in France where a truck ran through a crowd of Bastille Day celebrants. The story is still shifting all over the place. Sky News is still reporting 60 dead. New York Times is saying, no, it's dozens, but not quite that high. Looking at the scene of the incident, there don't seem to be that many people. And I know the cameras got there after some of the wounded were evacuated. The story is now that the police shot the driver of the truck dead in order to stop him. Another variation is that there was a passenger in the truck, and both of these people have been shot. But there's a lot of conflict going on here. It does look more and more like it may have been, probably was a deliberate event. Exactly why, I don't know. But one thing we can be guaranteed of, everybody is saying, how can we use this to push our agenda? How can we use it? We have to ban large white trucks here. We have to ban guns. We have to ban whatever. Still, no shots of the truck at the end of the trip. They got one shot of it approaching. A large white van, no labeling, no logo on it whatsoever. But my guess is probably, given France's willing cooperation with all these other false flags, that they're probably already trying to spin doctor this to suit some agenda. So we'll wait and see what's going on over there. Okay, getting on back here. Let's see. More confirmation about that non-disclosure agreement. This one coming out of activistpost.com. And another story, and I think this really says it all. Hillary Clinton's trustworthiness is now down at where Bill Clinton's was when that whole Monica Lewinsky situation started. And that's pretty low. And it is impossible to conceive of the American people wanting to vote for Hillary Clinton knowing that there is something going on that's being covered up. And I think there's going to be a landslide for Donald Trump in November, if he's still alive, that will overwhelm the obvious election fraud that we are seeing. It's almost like the rulers of the United States are trying to demonstrate to us they're in control and that we shouldn't do anything to try and stop them. Okay, let's see. Somebody just sent me something. Take a quick look here. Somebody just tweeted that there is now a fire at the Eiffel Tower. Oh, there's a fire near the Eiffel Tower. Looks like a regular building blaze to me, but the smoke is all wafting all over the place here. So everybody's on edge now. Oh, it's another terror attack. So we'll see what's going on as we come back to this. All right, we're coming up to the top of the hour and the start of the music, which means it's time for me to get on out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. A lot of people are sending more and more email, yeah, we'll look at that tomorrow. All right, there's the music. Time for me to get on out of here and do something useful the rest of the day. We'll be back tomorrow here on the Republic Broadcasting Network. The Lady Claire will be with us in hour number 3. So we'll talk to you tomorrow. Aloha, America.